Good afternoon, everyone. I'd ask that you take your places now. Thank you very much. I'd like to welcome you all to the second simultaneous session of this Shangri-La dialogue. The theme for this special session is New Patterns of Security Cooperation, and I'm delighted to introduce our distinguished panel comprising on my right over here, Air Chief Marshal Mark Binskin, Chief of Defence Force Australia. Close to me on my right, Thaung, National Security Advisor from Myanmar. On this side, Lieutenant General Hurley, Vice President, Academy of Military Sciences, China's People's Liberation Army. And on my immediate left, General Denis Mercier, Supreme Allied Commander, Transformation, NATO, North Atlantic Treaty Organization. I'll just make a couple of minutes of opening comments, and then we'll go into the remarks by each of the panelists. The term security cooperation has a broad range of meanings. It can refer to the type of close defense cooperation that treaty allies routinely put into practice, as is the case with NATO, or between the US and its Asia-Pacific allies, such as Australia, Japan, and the Republic of Korea. But the term also subsumes, at the other end of the spectrum, a different type of security collaboration, the more tentative collaboration on activities such as HADR between countries whose security outlooks and priorities do not necessarily closely coincide. I think it would be true to say that is the case with the security cooperation that occurs under the auspices of the ASEAN Defence Ministers Meeting Plus. And this is sometimes a form of confidence building. In between those two ends of the spectrum, there is cooperation between tentative security partners on functional areas of national concern, as between, for example, India and the United States on maritime security, and also between various combinations of countries on counter-terrorism. Moreover, I think it's clear that security cooperation at all levels of intensity is proliferating and intensifying in this great region. The intent of this special session is to map out the ways in which this is happening and to try to discern trends in security cooperation in the Asia-Pacific region. So some of the questions might be, where is this intensifying cooperation leading? Is it towards greater confidence between countries in the region and greater capacity to cooperate against potential security challenges? Or is it leading towards new alliances and a hardening of divisions within the region? Or is it possible for both trends to coexist on an indefinite basis? Another important question concerns the demands that this broadening and intensification of security cooperation with diverse partners is imposing on armed forces. Is there a limit to how much cooperation is feasible? Our panelists in this session are all extraordinarily well suited to give their views on this topic. I will ask them to speak on these questions from their national or in one case, institutional perspective. I will ask them to speak in the order which is listed in the speaker agenda. So first, Air Chief Marshal Binskin, could you please give us your views on new patterns of security cooperation? Thank you very much.
And thank you very much, and thanks for the opportunity to be here with you this afternoon. I think you just outlined some good topics for discussion after we've discussed all this, and so what I'd like to do is lead in with that discussion. So I'm grateful for the opportunity to be able to deliver a few remarks regarding the new patterns of security cooperation, in particular from an Australian perspective. And as many of you saw last night with our Prime Minister, he said that there are tremendous opportunities for greater prosperity and economic development across our dynamic Indo-Pacific region. But he did also caution that we face a broad range of shared security challenges, from continued territorial disputes to international terrorism, cyber threats and environmental threats. And while these threats are real, we do also have some good news stories to tell over the last few years and leading into the future. For example, every one of the hundreds of international engagement activities that we all conduct each year improves cooperation between our regional militaries. And that might be an area for discussion about how much we have the capacity to continue to do there in growth. Importantly, though, these international activities that the militaries do strengthen critical people-to-people links. They do help improve trust and transparency, and they do reduce the risk for misunderstandings that may ultimately lead to miscalculation or, worse, conflict. The ASEAN-centric security cooperation framework, including the East Asian Summit, the ASEAN Regional Forum and ASEAN Defence Ministers Meeting Plus, is a standout and a positive norm in the region. These forums promote rules-based order of global norms and encourage joint approaches to shared security challenges. The ADMM Plus remains Australia's clear priority for defence engagement with regional frameworks. The practical cooperation it fosters is not sporadic, nor intermittent or ad hoc, but regular, substantive and institutionalised. And with all that is going on in the region, we should pause to reflect on what a great achievement that is. In May 2016, Australia was pleased to work with Singapore, Brunei and New Zealand to jointly deliver a major combined maritime security and counter-terrorism exercise under the ADMM Plus. And Australia will continue to strongly support ADMM Plus, including as a co-chair of the expert working group on peacekeeping operations, which we're pleased to be doing with Indonesia out until 2020. And Australia also supports the steps taken by ASEAN to convene ADMM Plus ministerial meetings annually. Now, noting the geographic makeup of the region, maritime security cooperation is rightly at the forefront of regional cooperation. The future prosperity of our region is underpinned by our enduring freedom of movement on the high seas and marine resource protection. And in this light, maritime security cooperation remains a cornerstone of Australia's defence engagement across the South Pacific. Our Pacific Maritime Security Program helps Pacific Island countries to respond to humanitarian assistance and disaster relief contingencies and combat illegal fishing and transnational crime. In a demonstrated commitment to this program, Australia will provide 21 replacement patrol boats to 12 Pacific Island countries from 2018 and seeks to foster greater regional coordination amongst those nations. Across the region, our nations are increasingly coming together to provide humanitarian assistance and disaster relief, or to exercise our combined capabilities for such an event. And the issue here is you don't have to be a large nation with large number of assets to help out in HADR. An example of that are small nations like Tonga and Samoa, who came to Fiji's aid last year and to Vanuatu's aid the year before, after very large and devastating cyclones went through. There's no doubt that we are stronger when we work together, whether following natural disasters such as cyclones and earthquakes, or other man-made events. And finally, the region continues to work together to counter the threat of terrorism. This effort is largely and appropriately led by civilian enforcement agencies around the region. However, militaries also have a role to play. And in fact, the established military people-to-people networks and other communication networks do prove to be beneficial when we come to information sharing that helps nations be able to combat terrorism. So we must continue to work together to combat international terrorism and the threat of foreign terrorist fighters returning to our region, or foreign terrorist fighters actually coming to the region for the first time. In fact, terrorism is a global issue, not a regional one, and we need to approach it that way. And that is why Australia has joined the international coalition fighting Daesh, or ISIL. And in fact, there are 65 nations, I think, combating ISIL at the last count. In this global fight against terrorism, we work very closely with the United States, whose role in establishing the international coalition is an example of global leadership and what it can provide. In conclusion, we, the region, have made significant progress in fostering security cooperation, but we cannot be complacent. In fact, there are visible pressures today across the region that do need addressing. Combating threats and challenges together is in our mutual interest for the future. We do share a fundamental interest in the region's stability and prosperity, and are more effective when we work together in addressing the threats to these. Cooperation is only becoming more and more important as the world grows more connected, both technologically, also socially, financially and environmentally. So I'd like to thank you for the opportunity to address you all today, and I look forward to being able to further discuss these important issues when we get to the more broader discussion in the plenary. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Air Chief Marshal Binskin. You talked about a great range of security cooperation in which Australia is involved, and I think that in a way that illustrated the point I was making about the demands that must make on armed forces, and maybe that's the point we can return to later.
Yeah.
U Thaung Ton.
Thank you. Let me begin by expressing my deep appreciation to IISS for this opportunity to contribute to our discussions on new patterns of security cooperation. Earlier, I had prepared a written statement, but I think I will just give you some food for thought so that we can have an interactive discussion. We all agree that we live in a world of change and transformation. And this includes changes in the security environment. The security environment that we see today is an unprecedented one, as noted by the keynote speaker last night. The international security situation is arguably today more uncertain than at any time since the end of World War II. There are several reasons for this, in my view. First, there appears to be a cultural backlash against globalization. And you can see this in Europe, you can see it in the United States. We have seen a rejection of the status quo in many of these countries in Europe. The rise of the populist movement has threatened the international order as we know it. Second, the willingness of the United States to take the lead, as it has done in the past, to ensure the security in Asia-Pacific is increasingly being questioned. The U.S. appears to be pursuing a more unilateralist and nationalist approach. President Trump has made it clear that his administration will pursue the America First policy. The U.S. today is sending mixed signals, and this has an effect on the security architecture here in the Far East and the Pacific. You will know, for example, that President Trump stated that the countries, for example, I quote, "the countries we are defending must pay for the cost of this defense. And if not, the U.S. must be prepared to let these countries defend themselves." So what is the signal? What does this mean for countries in this region? On the other hand, the U.S. Defense Secretary says history is clear. Nations with strong allies thrive, and those without them wither. Strengthening our alliances requires living up to our treaty obligations. So recently, we have not had the kind of assurances that we need from the big power that was in our region that was giving us assurances for our security. Thirdly, and this is a little bit different and more important, the ascendancy of technology and the phenomenal rise of the use of social media creates a new challenge. Today, billions of people now have devices in the pocket that they use to instantly connect with others around the globe. Even in countries like my own, Myanmar, where telephones were hard to come by only a couple of years ago, we now have almost 100% coverage, and most of the time people are on the internet or the Facebook. So this presents us with both challenges and opportunities. Today, those disseminating disinformation are having a field day. They can create fake news, leak it, and spread it without much difficulty. We in Myanmar have been a victim of this spread of fake news. Last month, the cyber attack that happened in over 150 countries confirmed that the world is still trying to overcome new threats posed by cybercrime. Nations must not only crack down on cyber criminals, but also ensure that they have no opportunity to disrupt peace and stability. In these circumstances, the world would need to adapt to the changing security environment, particularly in our part of the world. We cannot rely on great powers alone to ensure international security as they did in the past. We need to create new patterns that involve nations, big and small, taking responsibility for their own security. As we heard the keynote speaker say, we have to make it possible for the big fish, the small fish, and the prawns and the shrimps to be able to live together in peace and stability. What we need to do at this juncture is to see if existing forums like ASEAN or the AIF, the IISS, and the +1, +3s that we have today are adequate to meet the challenges of the future. As it stands, ASEAN has been useful in ensuring that we have peace and stability in our region. And for the first time in many decades, there has been no intra-member, ASEAN member hostilities. So this is a big plus. But where do we go from here? So I think it is fascinating to look at the situation, and we will find that, say, 30 years ago, there were hardly any forum devoted to security cooperation. There was little multilateral cooperation in the security field. But today, we are seeing over 200 venues for facilitating Track 1 and Track 2 dialogues. We can discern new patterns of security cooperation, particularly in non-traditional security sectors such as counterterrorism, piracy, response to natural disasters, and even human pandemics. We can see a clear paradigm shift from the military security to non-military security. But what we actually need is a combination of military and non-military security for protection of our environment. The cooperation in non-traditional security sector should be embraced not only by the big powers, but all countries, big or small. In short, our security cooperation should be inclusive. If we are to succeed in moving from confidence-building measures to preventive diplomacy that we hope to do, we should ensure that international security cooperation include all stakeholders, the big fish, the small fish, and the shrimps. Our world today faces various non-traditional security challenges. While we see growing cooperation in the multilateral level field, we need to assess to what extent smaller countries are able to keep abreast with the international security community. Unless these smaller countries have adequate capabilities our security cooperation will not be effective. To conclude, I would like to suggest that we have a more coordinated approach to multilateral security, and we need to meet the common challenges that we face. We need to face it together. So with that, I would like to end this introduction and be happy to take questions later. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much, sir. You talked in your comments particularly about the range of challenges that has emerged, and the breadth of security cooperation that's generated, and the need for it to be inclusive. Maybe later in the discussion, maybe you could tell us something more about how your country is collaborating in various ways on security with partners. That would also be interesting. Thank you very much. And now, General Mercier, please. Thank you.
It's my turn to thank the International Institute for Strategic Studies for giving me the opportunity to address some brief opening remarks to this second special session on new patterns on security cooperation. Let me start with a short presentation of the trends of the global security environment, an environment that has no geographic boundaries and develops an unprecedented range of challenges at a rapid rate of change. Among other strategic trends, hybrid and cyber threats, state and non-state actors impacting the security environment just below the threshold of conflict, coupled with transnational challenges such as organized crime, climate change, or economic instability, further deepen the uncertainty and complexity of our security environment. As a consequence, crises become more and more interrelated, and the same actors may interact differently according to the situations, which makes situational understanding more complex. In this complex global security environment, no nation or organization can manage a crisis on its own. This leads to the question raised in this panel: what are the new patterns of security cooperation? Let me assume that we have a common objective for security, whatever the threat: detect, identify, and understand the early signs of a crisis, avoid escalation, and de-escalate potential developments, and if this is not possible, be ready to fight and win. Due to the global nature of threats, detection and identification of crises are not limited to a specific geographical area. The complexity of the security environment requires the creation of an ecosystem made up of a wide network of partners, including nations, international organizations, NGOs, the private sector, or academia, to name just a few. To share information, provide early warning and shared awareness, and make maximum use of existing expertise. Here I am not mentioning intelligence that requires specific arrangements due to classification policies, but publicly available and non-classified information. And we need to create the mechanisms to do it persistently. In addition, de-escalation of a crisis requires a rapid and coordinated decision-making. NATO is developing exercises through realistic scenarios to provide political, military leaders with the understanding of the challenges they may face when a crisis develops. Ongoing exercises already associate some partner nations and the European Union. The global nature of threats may lead us to consider scenarios that would engage a wider range of partners out of the Euro-Atlantic area, explore innovative decision-making architectures to face future transnational challenges, and help define the required needs to empower all parties who could play a role in global security. Finally, we need to be prepared to act together when necessary in crises combining multiple domains, including new areas of warfighting such as cyberspace or information operations. Interoperability is essential, as was demonstrated in Afghanistan when NATO and non-NATO forces from various continents deployed together but could not initially connect their systems. Responsiveness requires the development of standards and norms to enable command and control systems to be connected from day one. NATO is developing the Federated Mission Networking, a standard of interoperability that already associates many partners from different continents and other international organizations. It is implemented by progressively adapting new requirements and integrating new members. Let me stress that this norm does not question the sovereignty of the system it connects, but builds the bridges between them to allow a seamless federation of various actors. To conclude, Konrad Adenauer once said that we all share the same sky, but not the same horizon. We all share the same objectives, the preservation of peace and security. We also all share the same world and the same complexity of the 21st century. To adapt to the same environment, the most successful companies have built large ecosystems. Within these ecosystems, respect of all parties and exchange of data through flexible and adaptable architectures has become critical to deal with complex environments and develop new business models. The same principles apply to security. To answer the panel's question, improved cooperation built on a wide-ranging ecosystem of global partners, persistent exchange of open-source information, respectful, flexible, and adaptable relationships among parties, and the development of interoperability standards that enable large exchanges of data forms the basis of the new security cooperation patterns in the 21st century. Thank you.
Thank you very much, General Mercier. You emphasized the idea of cooperation with partners from different continents, the exchange of open source information, as you put it, an ecosystem of global partners. Thank you very much for those helpful comments, and I think we'll come back to some of the points you raised. I'm sure there'll be some questions. Thank you. And now I'd like to see if we can hear from the leader of the PLA delegation, General Hurley. Thank you very much.
Yes, I'm very happy to be here today. First of all, the Asia-Pacific security situation at present, Asia-Pacific situation is generally stable and positive. Region is a relatively stable part in this globe now. And development, regional hotspot issues, and disputes are basically under control. Promoting peace, stability, and seeking development are the strategic goals and common aspirations of most countries in the region. At the same time, regional security issues are becoming complex and diverse. Multiple transnational and interconnected security issues tend to break out abruptly. Traditional hotspot issues flare up from time to time, while non-traditional security challenges appear one after another. All the above pose grave threats to regional stability and prosperity. These Asia-Pacific security challenges are the reflection of three deep-seated problems which have been disrupting regional security for a long time. First, lingering Cold War legacies. The nuclear issue on the Korean Peninsula keeps fermenting and remains complicated and unresolved. Individual countries maintain their security through exclusive military alliances, base their own security on other countries' insecurity, and do not hesitate to stir up conflict and provoke trouble. Second, a lack of strategic mutual trust. Necessary actions taken by one country to safeguard its own security lead to overreactions and even vicious interpretations by other countries. Third, a lack of regional security mechanisms. There are several mechanisms for security cooperation which have played a certain role in maintaining regional security. However, it lacks mutual coordination among these mechanisms. Hence, there is tough work ahead and a long way to go for us to achieve a unified and highly efficient Asia-Pacific security framework. In recent years, Chinese President Xi Jinping proposed building a community of shared future for all mankind and advocated an Asian security concept featuring common, comprehensive, cooperative, and sustainable security. These ideas have provided brand new thoughts on breaking out of the security dilemma in international relations, creating a new pattern for Asia-Pacific security cooperation, and maintaining lasting peace in the Asia-Pacific region. Common security means respecting and ensuring the security of each and every country. We cannot just have the security of some countries while leaving the rest insecure. All countries have both the rights to participate in regional security issues on an equal footing and the responsibilities to maintain regional security. Comprehensive security means adopting a holistic approach to upholding the security of all fields. We should safeguard security in both traditional and non-traditional fields, not only consider the comprehensiveness in the security fields, but also take comprehensive security measures. And not only make efforts to resolve current security issues, but also emphasize on responding to various potential security threats. Cooperative security means promoting the security of all countries through dialogue and consultation. We should strengthen dialogue and communication, increase strategic mutual trust, and reduce mutual misgivings. We should persist in settling disputes in a peaceful manner and oppose to the willful use of the threat of force. We should pursue peace through cooperation and promote security through cooperation. Sustainable security means establishing the concept of focusing on both development and security to realize a sustainable security. We should endeavor to foster sound interactions and mutual supplementation of regional economic cooperation and security cooperation in order to promote sustainable security through sustainable development and guarantee sustainable development through sustainable security. The third area that I want to talk about is practical measures taken by China to enhance Asia-Pacific security cooperation. China pursues a foreign policy of peace, proposes and takes the lead in practicing the Asian concept of security. It's always worked to maintain, build, and contribute to international and regional peace. Although China is faced with multiple security challenges, it firmly follows a path of peaceful development. Although Chinese armed forces keeps growing, China is committed to resolving international disputes through peaceful negotiations and is opposed to resorting to force or the threat of force. In the process of settling disputes through negotiations, China has always held that countries, big or small, are equal, and issues should be settled equitably through consultation on the basis of equality. China has strived to develop and improve friendly and cooperative relations with other countries in the Asia-Pacific region. China-US relations are forging ahead positively and steadily. China-Russia comprehensive strategic partnership of coordination is also progressing very nicely on a high level. China-India strategic and cooperative partnership for peace and prosperity continues to deepen. In the spirit of regarding history as a mirror and looking forward into the future, China is devoted to the continuous improvement and the progress of China-Japan relations. China has actively advocated new thought on settling complex hotspot issues in the region. On the South China Sea issue, China puts forward and supports a dual-track approach, namely, peacefully resolving disputes through negotiation and consultation by countries directly concerned, and jointly upholding peace and stability in this region by China and ASEAN countries. On May 18, which was not too long ago, China and the 10 ASEAN member states adopted the COC framework, laying a solid foundation for the final agreement on a full code of conduct in South China Sea. On the nuclear issue on the Korean Peninsula, China has proposed a suspension for suspension initiative, namely the suspension of DPRK's nuclear and missile test and the suspension of large-scale joint military exercises of the U.S. and South Korea, as well as a dual-track mechanism which is intended to advance and achieve the 2 tracks of denuclearization as well as building a peace mechanism in the Korean Peninsula, aiming at fostering a favorable environment for Asia-Pacific peaceful development. China has put forward the One Belt, One Road initiative. Through policy connectivity, infrastructure connectivity, and trade connectivity, financial connectivity, and people-to-people connectivity, it aims to complement the development strategies of the countries along the Silk Road economic belt and the 21st century maritime Silk Road and promote common development. Highly praised, positively responded to, and actively attended by relevant countries and international organizations such as the UN, the Belt and Road Forum for International Cooperation was successfully held in Beijing not too long ago and gained fruitful results. Chinese armed forces have committed themselves to doing their utmost to shoulder more international responsibilities and obligations and provide more public security goods. They have intensified their participation in UN peacekeeping operations, deepened international security cooperation in overseas escort missions, and displayed their humanitarian spirit and strong professional quality in international disaster relief operations. Now, the Asia-Pacific region is bound together for good or ill. Building a community of shared future for all mankind is not a future tense, but a present tense. Chinese President Xi Jinping points out, never have we seen such close interdependence among countries as today, such fervent desire of people for a better life, and never have we had so many means to prevail over difficulties. So we have never had so many means to prevail over difficulties. China's proposal and practice of the Asian security concept conforms to the developmental trends of the times and has a global significance. It opens a future for Asia-Pacific security cooperation. Let's join hands, work together, and blaze a new trail for Asia-Pacific security featuring joint construction, all sharing, and mutual benefits. Thank you.
Thank you very much, General. You gave a comprehensive but also very concise look at the Asian security concept, which has been proposed by your leadership, and we thank you for that. And I think there are elements of that will provoke some questions and discussion. But it's an interesting idea, and thank you very much. We have approximately 48 minutes for questions and discussions in this session. I'd like to ask you now to put your name board vertically if you'd like to ask something, and then I'll recognize you and give you your chance to speak. Thank you very much. I'll just take half a minute to make a list of name boards that I see. Thank you. I'll do a first round of about six people to start off with, and I'll do a second round. First, Dr. Dino Patijalal, Ambassador Dino.
Thank you. Two short questions. First one is, I recognize there was a lot of reference on the question of architecture for the region. But I noticed there is really a poverty of ideas about where should we take the architecture and how should we upgrade, simplify, or improve it. So I would like to ask if any of the panels would like to share, are there any ideas, any new ideas with regard to how to improve the architecture which they particularly like or would endorse? So that's the first one. And second one is on, I noticed that the General General He from China mentioned about the recent ASEAN meeting, which came up with the framework for the ASEAN-China Code of Conduct, noting that it is a positive thing. And I agree, it's a positive thing, but there are those who say that it's still not the Code of Conduct, it's just a framework, and it took too long to reach that framework. So I'm just wondering if Mr. He would agree that this is a bit behind schedule, or is this on schedule? Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much. Ambassador Ishii.
Thank you. My name is Ishii. I'm Ambassador of Japan to Jakarta. Two quick questions to General He. First question, Code of Conduct framework. We really appreciate, highly value the agreement you reached with ASEAN countries. But just to follow up Ambassador Dino's question, what is the next step? How long will it take to come up with COC? Second quick question is, how do you apply the framework you described to the present and clear dangers such as North Korea? On equal footing, you described many principles which we all agree, I think, but how do you apply that to the real crisis and to solve it? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Professor Yazid.
Okay. Yeah, thank you. I would like to echo what Ambassador Patijalal mentioned before regarding multilateral cooperations. We have been talking, states have been uttering about multilateral cooperations, but we see in reality more sub-regional, more bilateral are coming up. So from the practitioner's point of view, we have been questioning it from the academic side. Is multilateral really the choice for now, with the unpredictability of what's happening in the region? How optimistic can we be with multilateral? Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Termsak.
Thank you. I would say that General He's presentation is most exciting. But I should like to point out that the Asian security concept is not new. The Japanese came up with the same idea 80 years ago. And without the American, you and I might be speaking Japanese right now. So my question is, are you implying that the existing international rules-based order under the US leadership is unsatisfactory and must be improved or changed with your new Asian security concept?
Thank you very much, Dr. Termsak. Professor Chris Roberts.
Thank you. I guess my question follows on, in some ways, from Ambassador Dino Jalal, and also the comments of a couple of the panelists, including the benefits of cooperation, whether globally or regionally. John Blaxland has talked about the idea of a new maritime initiative called MANUS, which would comprise of Malaysia, Australia, New Zealand, Indonesia and Singapore. It happens to mean sweet in Bahasa, Indonesia, but I think this configuration overlaps too much with the FPDA. However, I was wondering what some of the panelists' thoughts were concerning a new institutional configuration whose members might comprise of what I call regional stabilizer states. These are states that support a stable regional order, a rules-based order, and the rule of law. I can think of a number of ASEAN countries that might include Indonesia, there's Singapore, Vietnam, but also other countries in the broader Indo-Pacific, such as Australia, Japan, Korea, etc. Given the stalemate within ASEAN, the likely limited benefits of a code of conduct this late down the path, is it not a case of having to go beyond the current institutions and look at something new? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chris. Mr. Kasru.
When we talk about new pattern of security cooperation, I think fundamentally we also need to ask, what are the new pattern of threat we are facing today? And one key thing I think is missing in all this element, the role of non-state actor. In the last 2 days, I have in all the sessions mention of Daesh, IISS, people coming back from the field, how the security apparatus is going to deal with them. What is very important to realize, in this process, faith leaders, technology giants like Google, Facebook have an important role to play. And one of the challenges that some of the people sitting in the panel face in the coming days, how do we devise a framework to bring these non-state actors to play a role? Because when we talk about lone wolf syndrome, something we have faced last year in Dhaka, well-educated, well-to-do families, people just being radicalized through online, which is not possible for any security apparatus to tackle. So when we deal with a new pattern of threats, we need to think out of the box, we need to reinvent the wheels, we need to find new frameworks. Same line of wisdom may not be equally effective. So I think that is one of the core challenges of new security cooperation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We've got a collection of comments from 7 people there with about maybe 10 or 12 questions between them. I know there are some people who've put their name cards up, and I'll come back to you in the next round. But perhaps we could have some responses from the panel to that first collection of questions first. I think one issue which has emerged quite strongly is the existing institutional framework, the architecture, as some people call it. Is that adequate, or are new institutions needed? Does the architecture need to be adapted? For what it's worth, my feeling on this is, well, let's try and make the existing institutions work better rather than add new ones, which might also disappoint us, because that would dissipate the energy over an even wider range of activities. In other words, countries would be spreading themselves increasingly thin. But I think it would be great to have the views from the panel on this, and maybe in the reverse order to which they spoke just now. So if maybe we could go back to General Hurley in the first place.
When I was making a speech earlier, I thought that the mic would automatically on by itself. So perhaps the first few lines were not on. So I am sorry about that. After I finished my speech just now, a colleague, an ambassador, raised the question about the South China Sea of Conduct. I would like to thank you, experts, to take an interest in the South China Sea Code of Conduct. First of all, the ambassador mentioned that this Code of Conduct in South China Sea Has it taken too long to put together? I think this really has to do with the complexity of this issue. It has also got to do with the number of countries that are involved in the South China Sea. To try to reach a consensus definitely require time. Of course, we can say objectively that, or subjectively that, okay, we will negotiate today and tomorrow we will sign an agreement. Wouldn't that be great? But the truth is, the reality is, the reality is very different from what we may subjectively think. On May 18, we were able in Guiyang, China's Guiyang, to sign the framework for the South China Sea Code of Conduct. I already think this is much progress. This is already an accomplishment. Without this step, how can we move forward? Therefore, the ambassador's hope, well, I fully understand with what he wants, because this is very much in line with what we want as well. But we need also to have strategic patience as well as stamina. Continue to work hard along these lines and try to achieve an agreement as soon as we can, something that can be reached as a consensus between all parties involved. This is our hope. And another ambassador mentioned that the South China Sea Code of Conduct framework has been signed. So what do we hope to do next? You're very forward-thinking. You're able to look ahead, and I have very much respect for you. So after we have finished this step, what do? I'm sure that I can tell you that Chinese government and the ASEAN 10 countries' governments have got our own road ahead. We've got our own guideline. I represent the military from China. What our plan is, what our timeline is, where we hope to go, they don't report to me. The government does not report to me. Therefore, my response to you, if I were to tell you what the next step is going to be, I can only try to interpret it myself, come up with a conclusion myself to try to answer your question. I think that for the next step, there are at least two things that we need to do, because now we've already established a framework, but we have not signed an actual agreement. So the first thing we need to do is to use this framework to try to reach an agreement as soon as possible to sign a formal code of conduct so that the 10 countries in ASEAN, all the signatories, can abide by this. Is this going to be the first thing we should do? The second thing I suppose we should do is, after you've signed this agreement, you need to abide by this agreement, because this is not just a sheet of paper. This agreement is one where all parties got to abide by it. So based on the various rules and norms established in the agreement, we will settle all the problems one after another. Today, China and Philippines has already started the dual negotiations regarding these islands and territorial disputes. I think this is already a very good start. This relates to the second question of the Code of Conduct, but there was a third question regarding this Code of Conduct. Can we use this Code of Conduct to try to resolve the North Korean peninsula issue? The South China Sea Code of Conduct is primarily targeted at the South China Sea. That's why this framework was signed. In China, we often say that one key opens only one door. You can't possibly have one solution to resolve all complicated problems under the sun. Imagine, you can have one solution to resolve all problems, complicated problems in the world, then I think that would be a very idealistic and very simplistic view. If we can use the South China Sea Code of Conduct to resolve the South China Sea issue properly, I think that already is quite a big task. I think that we should already, in military terms, present a great medal to this issue, this code of conduct. If we use the South China Sea Code of Conduct to try to resolve the North Korean Peninsula issue, I think that the code of conduct in South China Sea, although signatories don't even hope for that to happen. So this is with regards to the third question regarding the code of conduct in South China Sea. So I would like to thank all of you experts, all of your colleagues, to have an interest in the code of conduct in South China Sea. Thank you.
General Mercier.
Yes, thank you. I will try to stick to your question regarding the architectures. Do we need to stick to the existing architecture or create new ones? Probably not the best place to make recommendations for the Asian continent, but I can give you some thoughts, giving the experience we have in the Euro-Atlantic area. In the Euro-Atlantic area, we have already existing huge international organizations and huge frameworks, and namely NATO, the organization I belong to, and European Union, but there are plenty of other organizations we have to deal with, especially when we look at the fight against terrorism. And one of the things is that looking at the new mission, especially regarding non-state actors and the fight against terrorism, and how we, as we say, project stability, we have developed a wide range of partners. And I must say that one of the issues is the more we will develop new architectures or new organizations, the more we will complexify our structures. So I would not recommend that. We need in our area, we need to more make our own organization more flexible by design and adaptable. And this is what we try to do now. And that's important because we have an organization, NATO, that has been built on the collective defense mission. But now, looking at the other missions, it's we try to develop this idea of a more federated approach. And when I say federated, it's not just only our nations or our partner nations, but as I mentioned, all the organizations, NGOs, academia that could help us solve a problem. And a key question is, for instance, Iraq, Libya. The best people who have the best understanding of these countries are not in Brussels. They are in the area with a regional approach. And that's important that we recognize that. And that's important that we try to look at what is the perception of our organization. And maybe in Iraq, NATO has a good, for instance, good perception, but it's definitely not the case in Libya. That does not mean that we cannot do anything. That means that we need to look at what are the countries, the other organizations that can be in lead, and we can have very flexible structures, architectures in supported role. And NATO is perceived many times as an organization when it goes somewhere, it wants to lead. But NATO could be in support of other international organizations or even nations, and with a very low profile, depending on the situation. And the key issue is not do we need new architectures or new organizations. The key question is how we build very flexible architectures, taking into account the situation, taking into account the geographical area, and how we define the supported role of all the different actors. Because as I mentioned, no one organization nor one nation has all the solutions to potential emerging crises. And we need to have combined efforts. But this combined effort, we need to recognize that we need to tailor them according to situations. And just to finish that, I very much appreciated the comments regarding the other domains and how we need to think out of the box when we look at the threats, and especially in the broad domain on information operation and cyber. And that leads to have a specific federation which are not limited to state actors, but we need to absolutely federate our efforts with the private sector too. And this is what we have started doing in NATO, especially in the cyber domain, when we are partnering with 7 big international companies that help us share information and that are essential for our strategic awareness. But this is not limited to the cyber domain. And the role of the big companies on the internet and the big companies that manage data is something we have to take into account, and we need to find ways to partner with them in order to be sure that in this absolutely essential information operation domain, we have the appropriate architectures as well. So my plea is that we do not need to create new things. We need to use what exists today, but with a more flexible, adaptable organization, which is, for me, essential to the complexity of our century.
Thank you very much, General. I think those comments will be very well received. Thaung.
I'd like to address the issue of whether there's a need for new security architecture. I believe rather than create new security architecture, I think we might want to make best use of the current security architecture that we have. For example, most of our countries are faced with many threats to security in the Asia-Pacific, mainly due to the transnational nature of these threats. For example, in the Sulu Sea, you have 3 countries, the Philippines, Malaysia, and Indonesia, faced with the threat of these terrorist activities. And only a few months ago, the 3 of them came together and have come to an agreement that they will have joint cooperation. So rather than all 10 ASEAN working on this, they decided that 3 of them who are directly involved do this. So what we need to do is probably to have subgroups in the ASEAN and in other multilateral setup to look into specific issues. So the Sulu example is a very good example. And last year they signed an agreement to have coordinated patrols in the area. So this is a good start. So I only like to cite this as an example. And with regard to cyber security, someone mentioned, I think it was Kashu there. I mentioned in my introductory remarks that because of the ascendancy of technology and the phenomenal rise of the use of internet, we do have a problem, not only among citizens, but non-state actors that are misusing the internet. I believe we have international, multilateral negotiations on this. Particularly, I would say Google, for example, is trying to find ways and means to have some sort of technology to offset this. So it is a good start. So we will depend more on these companies that are directly involved in this, rather than states. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Air Chief Marshal Binskin.
So I think a lot of it's been said. I mean, just a couple of points. First on the COC. So I agree with, I think, the majority of the views here that this is taking time to drag out and is something that we do need. But as we encourage the finalisation, from our view here, this needs to be in accordance with international laws. It shouldn't rewrite international law and try to rewrite the norms. It should just bring those together in a way that is understood and can be used in the region. With regards to the architecture and the framework, whatever terms you want to use, I agree, I think, with a couple of colleagues here. Whether you debate whether the security framework should be cooperative, coordinated, should be comprehensive, collective, there's a lot of C's in there, I know. The fact is, nations in the region need to want to have the framework, acknowledge the benefits of it, and then work towards achieving the best desired outcome that you can from that. Now, we could try and stand up new frameworks, but my view is we've got more than enough there at the moment to work with. It would be more beneficial to work on making what we have work and develop on the understandings that we have. And if we don't, we do risk nations trying to drive their own view on their own new frameworks. And so my preference would be to work on the current ones that are there. And so whether you want to debate whether you want a cooperative, coordinated, comprehensive, collective, one thing I can say, and it's been used all day after the Prime Minister last night, the big fish, the little fish and the shrimp. If you don't swim together in a school, you're going to risk the chance of getting picked off by the sharks. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Well, we have about 20 minutes left. I see about 9 or 10 people who'd like to ask questions. I'm afraid I may need to be selective about this, but it would help if each of you, whom I now identify, could make your point and ask your question quite briefly, as was certainly the case in the first round. Ms. Nyanda, Mr. Sorry.
Hi, this is directed to the Excellency U Thant Van. Could you describe a little bit in detail about what Myanmar is doing with regards to what's happening in Rakhine specifically? I think it touches on a number of issues that you've already covered in terms of the nature of there's some conflation between, I think, serious and real humanitarian issues, but just as equally security issues in the region. Thank you.
Mr. Abaya Gunasekara.
Thank you. My question's on strategic mutual trust building in South Asia. As you know, we haven't had the SARC for 2 years, and two big fish, India and Pakistan, having a conflict there. And a lot of small fish getting sort of in trouble because Sri Lanka, many other countries. What is the role that, how do you strengthen in a situation like this when two nations don't speak, as well as in a situation of bringing back the SARC and getting this in order? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Gulnaz Baig.
Thank you, and I'm going to kill this fish analogy. I think we've been talking about two patterns of threats interchangeably, and I think we should distinguish between two. There's the traditional and the non-traditional. And I'd like to delve deeper into the non-traditional threat, because in the absence of a clear big power leadership and the laudable desire to include the big fish, small fish, and the shrimp, how do we ensure that institutions remain agile in responding to threats which may come from an eel or an octopus, which may move very quickly and work solitarily? And I know that the second speaker said that perhaps the way to do this is to have subgroups based on functional cooperation. Then we go in a circle, don't we? Because what's the point of having the institution in the first place? Why don't we just go down the road of having functional cooperation from the first instance? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Andrew Yang.
Thank you. Similar question is, in terms of enhancing HADR joint operation to cope with the security cooperation in the region, is there any rule-based criteria for this kind of cooperation? If so, what are those criteria? A question to all the panelists. Thank you.
Thank you. Stephen Evert.
Thank you very much. A question on the blurring of internal and external security and sort of the linking that also to the architecture question that we've been discussing, how confident are people on the panel that we are able, within the existing architecture, to bring these other actors into patterns of cooperation? Because I observed that a lot of discussions in the official channels are still very much government-led. But everybody recognizes that you need to bring in the private sector or others. So how confident are you that we are able to do what we say in ministerial speeches, which is to bring everybody together who has an influence to bear on a given problem, such as cybersecurity, CT, trafficking, and others? Thanks.
Thank you. Mr. So.
Thank you. My question is for National Security Advisor Thaung. Myanmar is trying to achieve peace with a wide range of ethnic armed organizations, and there is an ongoing peace process in Myanmar. Many countries, big and small, near and far, are interested and want to get involved in Myanmar's political transformation. So the question is, does this international involvement present opportunities for the government of Myanmar to think about new patterns of security cooperation, or rather, does this situation present more challenges for the government?
Thank you very much. I think we need to stop there. I'm sorry to disappoint those who I haven't been able to point to, but we do have quite a range of questions there, and we have only about 15 minutes, but if there's time at the end, I'll come back to you. But I do apologize. So we had quite a few questions there in that batch that were Myanmar focused. So I'll turn to Myanmar's National Security Advisor and ask U Thang Thun for his response.
Thank you, sir. I would probably need more than an hour or so to cover these two questions, but I'll try to prune, graft, and do everything I can to put it in a nutshell. First, let me begin with peace talks, because that is a very current thing. In Myanmar last week, we had peace talks. This was the second session that was held during the term of this new government. Aung San Suu Kyi's government has been at the helm of state for the last 14 months. And this is the second time the peace talks has been held. It was held for 6 days and it ended last Monday. It is first and foremost a process. It's not a one-time thing. So we have had this talk last August. This is the second time. The significant progress achieved this time is that out of those groups that are up in arms, around 20 or so, 8 groups that signed the peace accord was at the table. In addition, all other groups attended the conference as observers. So this is the first time that we were able to get all these stakeholders at the same table. There were 45 agenda items. They agreed to 37 of the 45. So some of the remaining items were mainly to do with whether these groups can succeed from the union. So we have a country of 135 ethnic groups, and currently we have 14 states. And the discussion was whether we will have a new constitution, whether we will go in a different direction. So they agreed that in future, the country will be a democratic federal system. This, in principle, has been agreed. What this means is that there will be a chance for self-determination in each of the states. They will have their own governments, they will have their own chief ministers, they will be elect these chief ministers, but they will remain as a unitary state under a federal system. But there was no agreement reached on whether the Constitution will state that these units will have the possibility to secede from the Union. So that was an issue because the government and the military establishment would like to have in writing that nobody will secede from the Union. So that is being still discussed, and probably down the line, 6 months, it will be on the table again. But the good news is that they have agreed to share resources. They've agreed there will be self-determination. They've agreed that there will be a federal democracy in Myanmar, much like you have in India or in Germany or even in Canada. So that is what is envisaged. But people have to agree to first to a ceasefire, because ceasefire would be a first step, and the political dialogue. The question asked was whether it would help to have involvement of the foreign involvement in this. I don't think so, because we already have 135 groups trying to come to an agreement, and that's not going to help if we have advisors or others who would try to prod one or the other of the groups in a different direction. So we rather have it among ourselves to iron out the differences. With regard to Rakhine, rightly or wrongly, the focus of the international community has been on Rakhine in recent months, mainly because there is a lack of understanding of what's happening there. Rakhine is one of our poorest regions. It borders Bangladesh and India. And there we have actually two minority groups, not a majority and minority, but two minority groups that have lack of confidence and trust between them. And so this has been going on for several decades, but it was accentuated only recently because there was an attack on the 9th of October across the border. We know for certain that they were funded from the outside and inspired from the outside. This has been confirmed by intelligence agencies in the neighborhood. The government of Myanmar feels that we need to find solutions to the root causes of the situation there. The root causes are poverty, underdevelopment, lack of jobs. And that is why you have tensions between these minority groups who have little to survive with. So we, as a government, have set up a commission headed by Daw Aung San Suu Kyi herself to ensure that the root causes can be addressed. In addition, the government has requested Kofi Annan, the former Secretary General, to come up with advice, an advisory commission. His report is due in August, in a few months' time. But in March, he submitted an interim report with 43 recommendations, and most of these recommendations have promptly been acted upon. So we, for example, we've asked for media access. We have provided media access. He calls for unfettered access. Unfettered access is a little bit difficult at this time because on the 9th of October, when the security headquarters was attacked, the armory was looted and a lot of arms were lost. So unfettered access may be difficult, but we have, in the last few months, allowed foreign journalists to visit the places and to observe firsthand what's happening on the ground. Second, they've asked for humanitarian assistance. This has been provided by international organizations, plus our neighbors and friends from Indonesia, from Malaysia, Thailand, and Singapore, and elsewhere. The Indonesian foreign minister herself was able to go to the area and hand the assistance, token assistance by herself. So what we have only insisted upon is that the assistance be provided to both communities, because we don't want to have a situation where this will even make the situation worse. There was an issue with our friends from Malaysia. They wanted to send a flotilla to help the refugees in this area, but we have prevailed upon them to send the assistance to Yangon, as was the usual port of entry for all this assistance, and they've agreed, and the assistance has now been provided to the Rakhine area. Rakhine basically is an issue of two communities that do not have trust and confidence. It's an issue because there's poverty, underdevelopment, and lack of opportunities. So that is being addressed. There is no ethnic cleansing or no religious persecution, because in the rest of Myanmar, you can find Muslim communities, you can find Catholic communities, other Christian communities, and even some synagogues here and there. So it's not an issue of religion. It's mainly an issue of people who do not have the means to make ends meet, and they need help. So what we have asked for the international community to do is to join hands with us to find a solution to the problem there. Thank you. I'll stop there.
Okay, well, thank you very much. I think it's very useful in the broader context of this dialogue to hear your perspective on that in detail. And that's extremely useful. Thank you. We appreciate that. We have about 5 minutes left for our other three panelists to make their responses to that last round of questions. General Mercier?
So I will be very quick. If we go with flexible architecture, do we need organizations already? And if I understood well your question, and what we build in our organization is trust, and we cannot institutionalize trust. We build trust, and we build trust to the permanent exchanges that we have, and that's absolutely essential. And this is why this is a value of NATO, with the permanent representation of nations, either at the political and military level together. But this is the value of the relationships we are building with a wide range of partners as well. And but if you want to build an ecosystem in which trust is an assumption, we need to have permanent exchange of information, or it will not work. And we need to exercise it. And that goes with your question regarding the private sector. The best way, and this is a question we have, can we rely on others, especially in the non-traditional field and domains of operations that we say? Can we rely on private sectors and other organizations that are not governmental? And yes, we can do that, and we do that already, but we need to exercise it. And there is a key question behind that, is once we build this ecosystem, we need to exercise it, and we need to fail. And that's a key question. If we exercise it correctly, and this is we have a tendency in NATO to be successful in all of our exercises, we are wrong. We need to fail, because when we fail, we test really the trust, and then we'll have the insurance that it will work.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Jim. Air Chief Marshal Binskin.
I promise not to use any more fish analogies. Okay, so starting with the Strategic Mutual Trust in South Asia. This is military officer speaking, and this is where I do the football pass, because this is a diplomatic issue, not a military issue. And all too often, when we jump at strategies, people automatically jump to the military strategy and go, that's not a strategy. And that's right, because it's got to be a whole strategy in this, and this is a diplomatic one. Without passing the ball too much, though, and my views here, you've got to work with the nations to encourage the open discussion to start off with, and to do that, you've got to have the open channels. And all too often, those channels aren't necessarily direct channels to start off with, and so your traditional lines, traditional channels just don't necessarily work. So you've got to work down the non-traditional lines, and it may be it's an indirect path to do it. In doing that, I think everyone needs to acknowledge what the underlying issues are, and acknowledge what may be the best way to address them. And you tend to try and identify the common grounds and the common benefits for both nations, or all the nations, in why they need to work together, and what's in it for them to be able to do it. And one that we don't tackle a lot, but you do see around the region, without sort of going to some of the areas that we're seeing the security destabilisation, is there are some nations that it actually benefits them to have that destabilised environment around them, and so you need to tackle the peripherals as well as the main nations. Looking at the traditional and non-traditional threats, how do institutions remain agile? They tend not to, and that's the problem, because you find that some nations exploit that slow mechanism and work within the loop. And so to go to my NATO colleague here, I would say to you that agility in institutions will only grow proportionally as trust grows, because as trust grows, people trust the fact you can make quick decisions and quick actions, and everyone trusts that this is going to work, pull together to do it. I can't actually see another way. You can set up working groups, you can do all that, but I'm with you. That's normally just a bit of a chance to keep kicking the can down the road rather than look to where you need to resolve it. And the rules-based criteria for cooperation, I think, is a question. Again, it gets back to the word trust, and it seems to be the major word of the session. And it's a trust that the institutions and the organisations you're working with are going to work within international law and norms. And if you do that, you've got that trust. There's the trust that you will work to the common goals. But I don't know if everyone was in when Minister Anada spoke this morning, but she made a very, very good point, which may or may not have gone through to the keeper. Sporting analogy. Norms do change over time. They do. You've got to accept that, but they shouldn't change through coercive or single nation actions. They should change because the nations involved in that organisation want them to change, and they all agree that will change over time. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And finally, I'd like to ask for General Hurley's response, please.
Today, I am going to give my time, this time given to me for my last speech, and I would like to use this time to thank the moderator and let him speak. So this is the last time I'll speak. So I will give the speech time to our moderator, because our moderator has really moderated this session very well. And the time is up, therefore I will present my speech time to him instead.
Thank you, General. That is an example of a very positive approach and a very cooperative approach, and the IISS hugely appreciates that. Thank you very much, sir. Well, I'm afraid it's time to draw this session to a close. We've dealt with a huge topic. I can't really think of a bigger topic in the context of the Shangri-La dialogue. Of course, ultimately, the Shangri-La dialogue is about promoting regional security cooperation itself. I think it's important that we continue talking about different vectors and modes of cooperation, and we keep grappling with this topic year after year. We haven't come to any easy answers, because I think there are no easy answers to this question. But I suppose if there's one theme that's come out of this that strikes me as particularly important, it is the need to make existing institutions, to make the existing architecture work better, although in some cases that may involve the need to look for new partners, to look for new ways of cooperating, and that may include devolving to smaller groups of countries in some instances within the existing framework. But I'd like to thank our four panelists very much indeed for their excellent presentations, their great frankness during this session, which has been truly useful. We really appreciate that, and also to all of you, particularly those who made points and asked questions in such a constructive way. And my apologies to those who would have liked to have intervened, but whom I was not able to accommodate. But I hope that maybe you will, if you want to, approach the panelists now, or find other ways of communicating with them later. But thank you again very much indeed.
Thank you, sir.